Hello and welcome to a Word for This Day podcast. I'm Jory Schaefer, the show's host and creator, and it is my joy and pleasure to welcome you today. Welcome to anyone who has found us for the first time. It's no accident that you're here today, friends, so please don't run off quite yet. Please stick around for a bit and let's see what all the Lord has for us today. And welcome to you returning listeners. I'm so thankful that you are here. Thank you for coming back another day to think about God's Word together with me. Continue to pray for you regularly that the Lord would draw you closer to Him and give you more of a desire to know Him and to know His Word. And I pray that you'll be very intentional about your time with Him. Friends, I just encourage you, we must be intentional. It is so easy to get distracted, and I'm saying that from personal experience. I know how our minds can go in 100 different directions, and we think, oh, well, I'll get back to that in just a minute, but let me do this first. No, may we encourage one another to seek Him first. Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to us as well. And I'm not talking about material things. I'm talking about drawing closer to the Lord, and what a difference that makes in our outlook, in our faith, in our trusting Him, in knowing that He's there when we are walking through the good things and when we're walking through the difficult things. We need to be reminded of that. And so I just want to encourage you in that. Please don't let this be the only time you think about Him today. Please have other ways that you put in your path to remind you to focus on Him, whether it's working on a small group Bible study lesson or a Bible reading plan or listening to God-honoring worship music, spending time in prayer. There are multiple ways that we can focus on Him, and I just encourage you to consider that and don't put it off. If you didn't do much yesterday, there's not a thing you can do about that. We're not guaranteed another minute. We're not guaranteed tomorrow, but we have this moment that He's given us today for as long as He gives it, and so I just encourage you to focus on Him. Please do consider sharing this podcast with your friends, family, neighbors, strangers, just anyone you think may receive a blessing from it. And know, as always, that I love to hear from you. I love to hear what God's doing in your life as you're spending more time with Him. Well, our verse for the day, for this 5th day of August 2026, comes from the book of 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 5, and it reads as follows from the New American Standard Bible. And they said to him, Behold, you have grown old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint a king for us to judge us like all the nations. Oh, friends, who were they talking to? What was going on? What was this about a king? I'm excited for us to park here and be reminded of what we find in this book of history. And you know, if you've been here with me before, that this is the time that I think it's a good idea for us to look at where we are in the scripture, what book or letter are we in, who may have written it, what was going on, and that helps us to better understand and apply and recall and share, and also to know if someone's coming in and trying to twist things around on us. So today we know that we are in the Old Testament, and we are in this book of 1 Samuel, and that is in the history section of the Old Testament. Even though I tell you frequently, there is no doubt that there is much very important history in the 5 books of the law. But it's just named this because it's talking about the history of the children of Israel in these history books. And so we know that the Old Testament begins with the 5 books of the law, then it moves to Old Testament history, then to the wisdom and poetry literature, and then into the prophets, the major prophets and the minor prophets. The law goes all the way back to the beginning of creation, talks about how God created the heavens and the earth and created everything else, and then He created people, made them in His own image, but then sin entered the world, and that changed the relationship with God. That separated it, put a divide between God and man because of that sin. And we see the effects that it had and what God did because of that. But then we see His love for His creation, and we see how He had a plan to bring people back into right relationship with Him. But there would be much many things that would go on between what had happened there and then when his promise was kept through the person of Jesus. But we know that he talked with a man named Abraham, and Abraham was called a friend of God, and God made a covenant with Abraham that through him all the families of the earth would be blessed. And then Abraham had Isaac, and Isaac had Jacob, and Jacob's other name was Israel. And Jacob had these same promises that his father and grandfather Abraham had been given. And God told him that he would bless him and care for him, and he would have just a multitude of descendants, just like he had told Abraham and Isaac. And we see that Jacob's other name was Israel, and he had 12 sons. And during a famine, they went down to Egypt and grew from a very small number of 70 persons to up over 600,000 men on foot. They were enslaved. God heard their cries. He brought them out using Moses to lead them, and then they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. And then they finally got to get ready to go over to the end of the promised land. Moses was not going to be able to lead them into the promised land because of an act of disobedience that he had. And so God chose Joshua. And that book of Joshua is what we start, what picks up and begins those books of history. We see that Joshua led the children of Israel until he died. And then God appointed judges over the people, and we read that in the book of Judges. And they would lead the people. They would do what God told them to do at times, and then the people would do what was right in their own eyes, and all things would fall apart, and then they would come back to God. And we see that repeated over and over and over and over again. Well, 1 Samuel begins to tell us about this prophet Samuel. And we know that it's thought that these books of 1st and 2nd Samuel were probably one large volume because it tells about that transition from there being judges in the nation of Israel to a king. And we're going to start to see a little bit about that now. It's thought that that Samuel was the last judge, and he was a prophet. We read about how his mother Hannah prayed and prayed for a child, and she told the Lord that if he would give her a son, that she would give him back to the Lord. And that's exactly what she did. And we see about that in these first sections of Samuel, the first chapters of Samuel. And we see that God did use Samuel in such a mighty way. He gave Samuel messages to give to the people. Samuel led the people. And then we get to our section that we find in our verse for the day. But I want to back up. We're not sure exactly which human penned this book of Samuel. Some people think Samuel did, but Samuel died part the way through these two books. And so it's thought that it was another one of the prophets, perhaps, that wrote these books of 1st and 2nd Samuel. We see that 1st Samuel tells about Samuel, and then how the people cried out for a king, and how God gave Saul to be the first king of Israel. And then we see that Saul was disobedient to the Lord, and God chose someone else, and he had Samuel to anoint David. And that's all in 1 Samuel. But we see that we find the details about Saul's kingship through the end of 1 Samuel, and then at the beginning of 2 Samuel, we start to see more about David's kingship. And so that's kind of how this is set up. But it's good to have that overview to be reminded about where we are and kind of what's going on. But I want to pick up here over, let me see. I want to pick up in chapter 7 in verse 5 and then read forward to our verse for the day, because I want you to see how the people looked to Samuel as their prophet and their judge and their leader, and God had set it up that way. But then we'll see what changes here. And so in chapter 7, verse 5, it said, "Then Samuel said, 'Gather all Israel to Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you.' They gathered to Mizpah and drew water and poured it out before the Lord and fasted on that day and said there, 'We have sinned against the Lord.' And Samuel judged the sons of Israel at Mizpah. Now when the Philistines heard that the sons of Israel had gathered to Mizpah, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. And when the sons of Israel heard it, they were afraid of the Philistines. Then the sons of Israel said to Samuel, 'Do not cease to cry to the Lord our God for us, that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines.' Samuel took a suckling lamb and offered it for a whole burnt offering to the Lord, and Samuel cried to the Lord for Israel, and the Lord answered him. Now Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, and the Philistines drew near to battle against Israel. But the Lord thundered with a great thunder on that day against the Philistines, and confused them, so that they were routed before Israel. The men of Israel went out of Mizpah and pursued the Philistines, and struck them down as far as below Bethkar. Then Samuel took a stone and set it between Mizpah and Shin, and named it Ebenezer, saying, 'Thus far the Lord has helped us.'" I love that. So the Philistines were subdued, and they did not come any more within the border of Israel. And the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. The cities which the Philistines had taken from Israel were restored to Israel, from Ekron even to Gath. And Israel delivered their territory from the hand of the Philistines. So there was peace between Israel and the Amorites. Now Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. He used to go annually on circuit to Bethel and Gilgal and Mizpah, and he judged Israel in all these places. Then his return was to Ramah, for his house was there, and there he judged Israel, and he built there an altar to the Lord. I wanted you to see that kind of synopsis in chapter 7 of how Samuel cried out to the Lord for the people. He judged Israel all the days of his life. He reminded them about God's faithfulness and how he had helped them. And when Samuel was the judge, the Philistines were far away. I love that part. It says the Philistines were subdued, and they did not come any more within the border of Israel, and the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. And so I just wanted you to have that picture. And then we roll into this chapter 8. It says, "And it came about when Samuel was old that he appointed his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abijah. They were judging in Beersheba. His sons, however, did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after dishonest gain, and took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah." And then here's our verse. "And they said to him, 'Behold, you have grown old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint a king for us to judge us like all the nations.'" And I'm going to read past it. It says, "But this thing was displeasing in the sight of Samuel when they said, 'Give us a king to judge us.' And Samuel prayed to the Lord. The Lord said to Samuel, 'Listen to the voice of the people in regard to all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. Like all the deeds which they have done since the day that I brought them up from Egypt, even to this day, and that they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also. Now then, listen to their voice. However, you shall solemnly warn them and tell them of the procedure of the king who will reign over them." I love that. So you can see why it would have somewhat displeased Samuel that the people had asked for a king after he had judged them and led them and encouraged them to do what God wanted them to do. But on the other hand, you can also see why those elders would come to him and say, your sons are not doing like you did. So we need somebody who's going to be in your place. And they ask for a king. And so that's what we see in our verse. And they said to him, behold, you have grown old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint a king for us to judge us like all the nations. I'm not sure which all parts of that bothered Samuel because, he had to know that his sons were not walking in his ways. But maybe it's because he thought they weren't trusting in the Lord. And he knew how it would be to have a king, and he felt like they weren't trusting the Lord completely in that. I can imagine that could have been part of it. But then the Lord told Samuel to listen to them. God had made it clear that down the road there would be kings who would be their kings because he had mentioned it in the law. And so I want to hop over here and let you hear that. So it wasn't that it should have been a surprise that Israel would have a king to rule over them at some point, because God had given Moses the words to say about when you have a king and your king does this, that, or the other, this is what you should remember to do. And so let's hop over there to Deuteronomy. And this is in chapter 17 of Deuteronomy, verse 14. God gave Moses these words to give to the people. And remember, when Moses was given these farewell addresses in Deuteronomy, he was not going to be able to pass over into the promised land. Joshua was going to be the one to do that, but he wanted to remind everybody and to make sure that they knew what was coming up. But here in Deuteronomy 17:14, it says, when you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, and you possess it and live in it, and you say, I will set a king over me like all the nations who are around me, you shall surely set a king over you whom the Lord your God chooses. One from among your countrymen you shall set as king over yourselves. You may not put a foreigner over yourselves who is not your countryman. Moreover, he shall not multiply horses for himself, nor shall he cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never again return that way. And he goes on to tell what the king should do and should not do. But God had given Moses those words to tell the people that there would be a time that there would have a king to be set over them. And I think Samuel was just not quite ready for that yet, but he was obedient to God. And later we'll see that when God tells Samuel to go and where to go to look for this king, that he does exactly what he's supposed to do, and it is all orchestrated just as the Lord has planned. And that is the nature of our God. We may not may not understand, or may say, well, I wouldn't have done it that way, and that's true, because his ways are much higher than ours. His thoughts are much higher than ours. But may we continually desire for his will to be done. May we continually try to seek to do his will and to trust him and to obey him and to please him, because he sees the whole picture. As I tell you frequently, we do not. We see but just through how is it that it says over in the New Testament, through a glass darkly or dimly, but he sees the whole thing. And so we can trust him completely. And I love that we're reminded of this. But I know it had to have been hard for Samuel after he had led for all these years. And if he thought that they were rejecting him, that would be hard. But I'm so thankful that he trusted the Lord, and may we take that example and do the same. When we don't understand, may we walk by faith and not by sight, and may it be for his glory. Blessings to you, friends. Until next time.